So, welcome. We're going to talk today a little bit about a general overview of shamanism in Indus Valley culture. Now, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm an astrophysicist by profession. I'm an educator as well now, and so I've been really interested in this idea of beginnings. I'm really interested in this idea of the way that we were, first of all, it was like cosmological beginnings, like how did the universe begin, all that kind of thing, as you'd imagine. Then I began to be interested more so in beginnings in terms of cultural beginnings, beginnings of balance, like how were we able to live for thousands of years in places all over the world, albeit to begin with in a more dense community, sort of dense geographical setting, but how was it that we were able to have this almost symbiosis with the natural world? And what is it that's changed in the way that we and how we live that's allowed us to end up as we are today? I was going to use the word chaos, but I'm not going to use the word chaos in this magical context. So, so to begin with, then I've been fascinated by Indus culture for a while, primarily because they got to this point where they had these beautiful cities. They had agriculture, they had sanitation, they had beautiful housing, really gorgeous little cities, or big cities, and they were spread throughout these wonderful regions, all the way down to coastal regions and all the way up to mountainous areas. And yet they decided, after a period of 700 years of peace in most of these cities, like yes, there was a little bit of infighting, as you would imagine, in populations that are in condensed areas, but they decided to leave these cities to pursue more simplistic, more pastoral lifestyles again. And there were no big events, there were no big famines, there were no big catastrophes, there was no siege of other cultures into those cities. So I was fascinated as to why this might be the case. So I decided to focus on this idea of simple cultures, well, not simple culture, but of cultures that were untethered to cities. And in my research, I found out about a culture called the Piraha, which are this beautiful culture, still exists today. They're under threat a little bit. And they exist in an egalitarian society. And this is like the dream. We all hope and pray that sometime in the future we'll have this beautiful egalitarian society. And it exists today. They're hunter-gatherers. They're nomadic. They follow the food. They have very little understanding. They have no notion of time. They have no notion of future. They have, if they talk about something they're going to do tomorrow, they talk about it as I'm just going to do it. It's happening. It's happening now. They don't have this idea of time. If for example, to get particular fruits, they wait until this particular bird flies through the forest, and then they go and they follow the bird to get the fruit. It's a beautiful community, and they have no agriculture. This is the other thing that's really interesting to me. They don't grow anything. As I say, they're nomadic. They move around through the rainforests, dependent on the spirits. Each one of them has a direct connection to the spirit realm. To the spirits of the trees talk to them to tell them which branches to use to make their shelters. The spirits of the trees talk to them to tell them which particular parts of the tree they can use for which practice, which kind of whatever they're trying to construct. And that really struck me, the fact that they didn't have a person or people in that community whose designation was to instruct them in the realm of the spirits. Everybody's connected. That's an incredibly powerful way to live, where you are reliant on each other for support, as Nikki was saying, this idea of community, this idea of support. This idea that it's mutually beneficial for us to be nice to each other and to like take care of each other and to make sure that the next generation has that same kind of thought process. And so now I thought to myself, well, if they had this connection to the spirit realm and everybody had this connection to the spirit realm, then what changed? What changed about the way that, if we can imagine that this was a widespread way of living, what changed that allowed us to move to this more shamanistic culture? And again, shamanism is a complex term. It's it encompasses a huge variety of cultures, of practices, of time. It's over a huge amount of time. And I think it's really important for us to remember that shamanism is personal to cultures. It is particular to cultures, and not so much to times, because we see commonalities between practices that transcend time and experiences that transcend cultures and time. So it's a fascinating subject, as I'm sure you know. So the focus mostly on modern shamanism today is on the shamanism in Siberia. And if you talk to Siberian shaman, one of the big things that we always think about when we talk about shamanism is entheogenic substances. I spoke about this a little bit earlier this year. And the use of hallucinogens to access this realm of the spirits is thought to be a common factor, and certainly in Amazonian cultures the use of ayahuasca and ayahuasca analogues is absolutely prevalent, and we know that. And in Siberia, although there's a divide, in Mongolia and southern Siberia, for example, they don't really know about entheogenic substances. The likely ones would be mushrooms in that region, and they don't really know so much about that. Northern Siberian shamans do know about things like Amanita muscaria, but they say it's too powerful for them to be able to maintain a consistency of focus in their shamanistic journey to be able to bring back any knowledge. And we have to remember that the role of the shaman is to, it would seem on the surface incredibly addictive to be able to have the ability within a community to access all of these incredible states of being, to be able to transcend the temporal realm, to go into the spiritual realm and commune with spirits and entities that nobody else has access to gain knowledge that no one else has access to, and then be able to come back with that knowledge. It's a huge responsibility, and that's the exact point of the shaman. For the most part, you get malevolent shamans that misuse their power, but for the most part, throughout cultures, it is that responsibility. They understand that they were chosen by the spirits at birth or at a very young age to be the custodians of transportation of that knowledge from the spiritual realm into the temporal realm. And there are some beautiful examples, and I'll talk about those a little bit later about how the shamans do this. So the etymology of the word shaman starts most recently in time in Siberia, and we can follow it all the way back to the Vedic, the Tunguskic languages and the Sanskrit languages, and it appeared in those three language groups roughly at the same time. And so the idea is that word, if it had carried on, and it probably did, into the Indus Valley culture, the Harappan culture, then these icons that they were producing, these seals that they were producing, the Harappan culture were really big on producing these seals of figures with horned headdresses. There's three really beautiful examples where they're sat in a meditative pose, seemingly meditative pose, and one of the things I'm interested in is the transition into more meditative practices from that region and from those people, and how it changed from a more spiritual practice in terms of communing with spirits to a more meditative practice. So the big things in Siberian shamanism are the horned headdress, the veil. If you were here last night and you saw Furpa, if that's the pronunciation, they had the veils in front of their faces for a long time. That's really important for shamans to make sure they don't make eye contact with other people once the spirit is within them, because they don't want the spirit to then go into another person. It's dangerous for any other anybody else that's involved in the ceremonies or involved in the healing process to be able to see their eyes. And the horned headdresses of these shamans is really, in the Siberian shamans, is really important, because it's an antenna, it's a conduit for the spirit. So when the shaman summons the spirit sometimes appears as mist, sometimes as clouds, sometimes it's only the spirit's only visible to the shaman in the spirit realm, and the antenna, the horns then act as a conduit for the spirit to know who to go into. Like, where's the power coming from? Where's this person coming from that I need to occupy? And again, if you look at, I thought I'd have some slides, but obviously not. In the shamanistic cultures in the seals of the Indus Valley, you can see these exact same horned headdresses on figures carved into seals that were then used to stamp goods and to send out throughout the Indus Valley culture. And so the headdress is a big physical object that is used by the shaman, but there are lots of other objects that are physical that are used by shamans. Again, the veil is one, the rattle being another really obvious one. And so these objects allow the shaman to enter states of trance, to enter that spirit realm without the use of entheogenic substances. And again, for last night, the throat singing, the throat singing, and at the opening ceremony there was some drumming. For me, that was an incredible moment to be in the room with the drumming and be able to focus on the drumming. And it's a very powerful experience. It's very easy to see how these shamanistic cultures were able to access these states just through repetitive, rhythmic, acoustics. It's incredible. Sound is very important, plays a very important role in the realms of magic, the realms of shamanism. Remember, like the term shaman is such a difficult term. The purpose, again, for these shamans in most cultures, well, in fact all cultures, is as a healer to access, not solely, there are other medicine practitioners in these tribes and in these cultures as well. But the shaman's job, one of their jobs is as a healer, access these medicines from the spirit realm and bring them back. Another one of their jobs is divination, and Nikki was talking about being able to access different realms of time. And the shaman, there are really three experiences that the shaman has of time. There are sort of simple experiences where they experience compression of time. It might seem as though they've been gone for 45 minutes to us, but they may have been gone for hours in the spiritual realm, that had a full journey and come back. They are able to access the past much more easily, by all accounts, than the future. The future takes a little bit more and more experience and more control of self to be able to access that realm. Then the sort of next grouping of time experience is that of simultaneous time. And the most prevalent example of that is with the Aboriginal Australians and their dream time. The Aboriginal Australian shamans, for want of a better term, are able to access the dream time at any given time. The dream time runs concurrent to the temporal time frame, and they can switch between the two almost at will as they gain more ability with this, which is again means that they have to traverse these two realms on a daily, on an hourly, on a minute by minute basis, and they have to reconcile as they switch between the two what's the influences of each on the other. And that's, again, a huge mental and physical strain on them. So we have this idea of sound and this idea of being able to induce trance then. And the third state is this ecstatic cosmic union state that we're often most familiar with when we talk about shaman. This oneness with the universe. And yes, we can use entheogenic substances in ritual circumstances to be able to access these realms. Shamans can also access these realms through sound, through induction of trance, through sounds, and it can be things like the chanting, it can be things like the drum, as I mentioned, and there are some really interesting examples where there are some cultures that use utilitarian objects. For example, in Central Asia, there are examples of using a what's called a winnowing fan, which is a fan which they use to separate the husks of the rice from the grain itself. And on a daily basis, in these cultures, it's the women that would use these to separate the husks from the rice. But in a ritualistic setting, the shaman will use the same implement, and it's seen as a device that again transcends these two realms of sort of chaos and order. The rice, when it's this agglomeration of the husks and the grain itself, the useful and the necessary and the unnecessary, and this device is able to sift out the necessary, the needed from the unneeded, and so it's seen as a similar implement. And with rice in it, often it's used to generate a rhythmic soundscape that is focused on them by the shaman and allows them to go into that state. Now, from an archaeological point of view, if you found a winnowing fan on a site from 3000 BC or something within that region, you would say to yourself, oh, it was just for agriculture. So we need its context, lots of these things. And my thought about why these things why shamanism in these cultures isn't taken more seriously is because of the fact that we aren't looking at it in a contextual sense. It's being looked at only in a materialistic sense. What material evidence can I find that I can say, oh, they definitely had agriculture because I found some winnowing fans. A great example of this is pottery and geometric design. Early designs on pottery from early cultures, 3000 BC, all the way up to about 2600, 2200 BC. There's this change from geometric design to then more iconographic design, designs of birds and plants and all these kinds of things. But before that was geometric. And again, I was interested in why that form. We tend to think, or archaeologists, anthropologists tend to think that they increased in their ability, they increased in their skill level to be able to represent the world as they saw it. And again, I don't like that idea. We always stand from a modernist point of view, and we look back in time and we see these people as being lesser because they haven't got their devices of modernity, and I disagree with that. So I was interested in other tribes that we know about, other cultures that we know about, that use these kind of geometric designs in a way that is much more complex than just them being unable to represent the world in any other form. And it turns out again in Amazonian cultures in Peru, there's a culture called the Piro, and another culture called Shipibo, and they're very close neighbours. And their entire worlds are sound, based around sound, or as they like to term it, design. Everything is imbued with a spiritual design. Every object, every person, every mechanism in their worlds is imbued with a design pattern. And they spend their cultures is based entirely around this design pattern. So again, for example, when Nikki was talking about this idea of ancestral knowledge, when somebody in the Piro culture dies, for example, they don't keep their stuff. They burn all of their stuff. It gets incinerated. And what's left is that knowledge of the design, particular design patterns that have been passed on from generation to generation. Again, in the Piro, it's the women that learn how to paint, how to embroider, how to form these complex designs. And all of these designs were given to the Piro by the cosmic serpent, by the cosmic anaconda, who has the most intricate designs right at the tip of its tail. And the skill is to be able to form the most intricate, complex design that you can, as if it were at the tip of the cosmic anaconda's tail, because that's where the most power lies. That's the culmination of all of the power in the cosmic serpent at the tip of its tail. And this is shown in the rituals that they have especially for girls becoming women. The mother of the girl spends some time fermenting beer. The pots that the beer are presented in are painted with design which is of a very particular type. The girl herself is painted, not so much in this day and age, but only 200 years ago, every object in a Piro village or a Shipibo village would have been painted with design. Every object. Even the inside of the roofs of their huts, everything was painted with design. And it's become lesser and lesser, and one of the things that's lessened is the body painting. But the young girl would have been painted on her body and on her face by her tribal elders, female tribal elders, but also by lineages of people that are related to her mother and her grandmother. And it's usually the grandmother and the grandmother's kin that paint the young girl. And the grandmother understands at that point that this is the last duty she will do in the village. And again, speaking about preparation for death, after that moment, after that ceremony of the girl becoming a woman in the Piro tribe, the grandmother then won't take part in any other ceremonies within that tribe. And the mother then also realizes the fermentation of the beer represents the fermentation of her daughter in the womb, like the birthing of this mixture of these two ingredients to form a new substance. They see it in the same way as they do the birth of their daughter. So she understands that then her next position, the next time this ceremony happens, she'll be in the position of her mother. It gives us some perspective on preparation for death. The shaman's role in this society, as in many societies, is to go into the spirit realm. The spirits are keepers of this medicinal, this divinatory knowledge, these divinatory designs, and he brings it back when in the Piro culture, the shaman goes into the spirit realm, sees with the use of ayahuasca into the spirit realm, sees the vivid design patterns. These design patterns come to the fore. They become the most prominent aspect of his vision and of his hearing. And this is what's also interesting in a lot of cultures, is when the shaman transcends into the spirit realm, we get heightened states of synesthesia. Now, I suffer from it myself suffer. It's a beautiful gift. I see colours as numbers, and being a cosmologist, that's made it very incredibly difficult. I can't do simple algebra, simple arithmetic in my head, because smaller numbers are much less pronounced than larger numbers. As a number gets larger and kind of more unique in my mind, I think, I'm trying to still rationalise how this works, they become more stand out, but the smaller numbers, they're just everything's brown. Smaller numbers, everything's just brown. The colours are all mixed. I've got no idea what's happening. You know, when you're in art and you're trying, you're 11 years old and you're trying to paint something in art and make cool colours, and everything just ends up brown. That's what it's like for me trying to do simple arithmetic. It's a terrible thing. So synesthesia is an aspect of the shamanistic world, then, it seems. And again, the Shipibo tribe talk about this. They sing songs where they talk about my voice, my beautiful painted vessel. They see audio, and I think Terence McKenna, to bring up his name briefly, in such instances, was one of the big proponents. He was one of the first, I think, people to very publicly speak about this idea of, during DMT trips for him, he talked about sound condensing into kind of like objects. Sound would directly convert into some design, some geometry. And he was very interested in the early to mid-90s in using computer programs to try and build these worlds so that everybody could see them. So the shaman goes into the spirit realm, the spirit, the designs are all around him, and a particular design will come in, and as soon as it touches his lips, he sings, he begins to sing. And that song is the design manifest, the vibratory geometry manifest as a vibration in the temporal realm. And he sings that song to, for example, the patient that he's trying to heal. And the Pino, the hummingbird, which is the weaver of intricate design in the culture, appears above the patient's head. And as he sings the design into the patient, Pino reconstitutes that design within the body of the person. And every Piro and every Shipibo member of that culture receives some treatment by the shaman at some point in their life. And that design, the initial design that they're treated with, sticks with them even after death, so that the shaman can recognize members of the Piro and members of the Shipibo in the Shipibo culture tribes in the spirit realm. They can recognize their elders, their grandmothers, their grandfathers, because they can see them, because they can see the design. And it's reconstituted in the person. But interestingly enough, the shaman can also reconstitute this design in physical form on pottery and on embroidery. Now, the way that he does this is to teach the women of the village these designs. And there's some beautiful examples in Shipibo culture. They have this regular kind of practice where they build these huge pots that are more than 1 meter in diameter, and you can sit either side of it and you can't see each other. And two women will sit either side of this pot, and they will paint design on this pot that as they rotate as they move around, as they rotate the pot, the two forms that they're painting will match up perfectly, seamlessly. And they do this by singing. Now, yes, they sing words, and some anthropologists used to think that it was the words that had made, clearly they were communicating through language to be able to direct each other. But it's not the case. It's the vibration, it's the rhythm, it's the song itself that is important. It's the words are just simple. They change over time. It's the rhythm itself that is the design that's been brought from the spirit realm. And it's interesting because the women who paint these designs, who embroider these designs, have a completely different language set for a design than the shaman will. So the shaman has the initiatory knowledge to be able to speak a word or sing a word and have that design reconstitute its power in the temporal realm to help re-heal somebody, for example. And so for me, I'm really interested in the way that we view pottery. Like we find all these graves in the Harappan culture is one in particular where you find people buried with a huge amount of pots. And often we tend to think about this as, clearly that just shows their economic status in the tribe. Obviously they were the richest people, they were the most powerful people. You know, I think we need to really look at the way that we evaluate these cultures. My research so far has kind of led me to the idea that these pots are spells, are incantations that they can take with them into the spirit realm, and they can use in the spirit realm to then for protection and for guidance and for knowledge in the spirit realm. Thank you very much. Thanks.